Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1971 and we're going to be taking a look at Neil Diamond and he's going to be playing through Solitary Man. So let's get him up on screen and see how he gets on.
Finally it came to be and we'll do it now. Linda was mine till the time that I found her holding Jim, loving him. Then you came along, loved me strong. That's what I thought, me and you. Well, that died too. Don't know that I will, but until I can find me a guy to stay and won't play games behind me, I'll be what I am. Solitary man, solitary man. I've had it to hear being where love's a small word, part-time thing, paper ring. And I know it's been done having one girl who loves you, right or wrong, weak or strong. Solitary man, solitary man. Don't know that I will, but until I can find me a girl to stay and won't play games behind me, I'll be what I am. Solitary man, solitary man. Solitary man. Oh.
And there we have it. I thought I'd let it play all the way through because it is a short song, short performance here. But Neil Diamond is one of those artists who, if anybody got close to how to break the equation for songwriting, he was one of those guys that was right up there in terms of the compositions that he put together, the arrangements, the way that in this track, for example, the dynamic change we have is so clearly evident. You don't have to know about music to notice the difference between the verses and the chorus and that shift in dynamics that we have. Everything is full in for the chorus, and that is what the great songwriters do. They get their choruses to stick out, to be memorable because of the melody and the way that they write them. Another thing that Neil has got going on in his compositions is that deeper lyrical content, but also poetry in terms of how he uses the phrasing, but also the choice of lyrics in order to dance around poetically with everything that he's throwing into a particular verse or chorus. And within this track especially, we have rhyming within vocal phrases and not always at the end of lines. It gives it a really poetic nature in that delivery, and that's something that really does make it stand out, as well as the arrangement and the dynamics that Neil has written into this particular track. Let me point out as well that Neil starts off the track with some fingerstyle playing on his acoustic guitar here, and the way the band comes in, it's always difficult when somebody is starting a track themselves on acoustic guitar and then the rest of the band have to slot in to that particular rhythm and groove and tempo that the person's playing on the acoustic guitar, and the band are spot on here in the background. The vocal is so prominent, and just while I mention that, the tone that Neil has in his voice just sets him apart as well. The way that Neil delivers the vocal, he's always in that chest register, so he's getting a really thick vocal tone, but also at the end of the lines, the way that he tails off sometimes in pitch, so that we get a gradual decrease in pitch, very much like you'd find rock singers. There isn't always that constant vibrato at the end, but he has got the ability to throw that in as well. So it means that you get that range of expression at the end of his vocal lines that makes the vocal interesting the whole time, and it means that he can express with his vocals in different ways. He isn't just stuck to vibrato, he isn't just stuck to tailing off lines, and he isn't stuck to trills either. The journey that we go on in this song as well is so interesting, considering that we haven't got a really complex progression going on and we're just going verse, chorus, verse, chorus. We have an instrumental section in there as well by the horn section, which is effectively taking the place of where you would have a guitar solo in other songs. So we get that little break there, but then we're straight back into a chorus again. So we don't have really a middle eight in there or something else that you would split up the song with. But the reason it's so interesting is because of the way that Neil has arranged the track as a whole. We've also got a female backing vocalist in there. And if you watch this song the whole way through to begin with, you might not even notice it because it's so well put together musically by Neil to have that harmony line in the chorus and having his vocals so up front. And the lyrical content, his delivery, means that you're focusing on his voice, and you might not even be aware that there's another voice behind his in the chorus because Neil is so great at delivering that main vocal. This is one of those songs that you can listen to again and listen to the arrangement and different instruments. If you want to listen to that horn section, that you can do. If you want to listen to the bass, that is great as well. There's so much that's going on within this track that's interesting to listen to. Like with all the great songwriters, if you have the lyrics on screen when you're following along with this song, it's going to really deepen the understanding of the song, but also the artist. And you can start to appreciate the choice of words that we've got in there. It's always the case when you look into it in more detail, it just gets deeper, the meaning and the things that you can get from the song and the poetic nature of that lyrical content. I mentioned about Neil playing guitar, playing fingerstyle as well. He got his first guitar aged 16, so he was a relatively late starter in terms of picking up the instrument. And before that, he joined the freshman choir at school, and he was in the same year as Barbra Streisand, who also joined that same choir. I don't think they were great friends, it just so happened they were both in the same year and sang in that choir. And when he went to a Jewish club, I think it was like a summer camp, he saw Pete Seeger performing, and this really lit the fire inside Neil, because as soon as he got back home, he started taking guitar lessons and started to write his own songs. So when Neil got to university, he found that he got bored really easily, and he got the train to Tin Pan Alley with a mind to sell his songs or sign a contract with a music publishing company. And it just so happened in the final year of his studies, he was really close to graduating, but he was offered a contract by Sunbeam Music Publishing, and that was as a songwriter, and it was $50 a week. So he gave up on his studies and signed that contract. And this was for 16 weeks, and it would have worked out $50, as in today's money, about $400. So it was pretty good. But unfortunately, at the end of that 16-week period, he wasn't rehired. So it ended after that, and he kept writing songs, but now performed them himself just for demo purposes so that he could then get them down in the studio, but then still pitch them to music publishing companies. Neil's first recording contract was billed as Neil and Jack because this was with his friend called Jack Packer, and it was an Everly Brothers type of setup. They did record 2 singles, and those got released, but unfortunately didn't do very well commercially, even though they got great reviews. Later that same year, in 1962, he was signed as a solo artist to Columbia Records, and they did record a single, they released it, but unfortunately it didn't sell well, even though it got great reviews, and Columbia dropped him from that record label. So Neil went into publishing houses in terms of trying to sell his songs to anybody that he could, and at this point he did write Solitary Man. That was one of those songs that was written in amongst loads of other songs because he'd be trying to sell at least 1 song a week to record labels, and he managed to do that, but it meant that he only had just $3 a day for food. So if he managed to sell a song, which he had to live, he still didn't make a lot of money from it. This song was the first that Neil recorded himself under his own name that actually got into the charts. And at the beginning of this video, I'm going to put the link to this video in the description below so you guys can check it out if you want to. He gives a little intro and explains about this song and how personal it is to him because it's the first one that he heard on the radio, and as a songwriter he was just happy to hear one of his songs on the radio, and that's all he wanted. He wasn't bothered about the money or fame, but his first real success in the charts wasn't for him. It was in 1965, and that was for a song called Sunday and Me, and that was recorded by Jay and the Americans, and it got into the top 20 of the US charts, so it was a big hit. And he also wrote a few tracks for a band called the Monkees, and a lot of people will know I'm a Believer and A Little Bit of Me, A Little Bit of You. Those tracks did really well, but I think in all he wrote 5 tracks for the Monkees. So in 1966, Neil signed a record deal. This would have made him 25 years of age, and that was with Bang Records, which was part of Atlantic Records. And he got out there and he gigged with loads of different artists and bands. I think The Who were in there as well. And he was in the advantageous position of having had his songs covered by other artists before he released them himself. So it meant that when he did release them, people saw him not only as a singer, a performer, but a songwriter, because they then realized that the songs that they had loved from these other artists were actually Neil Diamond songs. The only problem was that Neil felt restricted in this record deal because he wanted to make more ambitious music, deeper music, and he tried to sign with another record label. He did have disputes with his current label over royalties as well, which always seems to happen, but then the record label found out that he was trying to sign with another label. So loads of lawsuits started and the decline in sales because there was now a dispute within the record label and Neil, who was one of their artists, and that took so many years to sort out. It was finally sorted out in 1977, and that meant that because Neil won the case, he could then keep the original master recordings of the stuff that he did at Bang Records. So in 1969, Neil signed with Uni Records. At the same time, he's having the dispute with his previous label, but the first album that they released unfortunately didn't chart. The second album was called Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show, and that did chart. And this is the same time that he released Sweet Caroline, which was a massive hit. So much so they added it to the end of the album, but also changed the name of the album to Sweet Caroline. And the next album after that was Touching You, Touching Me. So the release of Sweet Caroline really laid the foundation for that future album release, but also it really was a massive hit for Neil and set the theme going into the 70s. So as Neil entered the 70s, he released 9 albums in all over that decade, and most of those albums got into the top 10 of the album charts, so it was an onslaught for the whole decade on that album's chart. He gigged a lot, he headlined at Broadway, and from 1972 he wanted to have a little bit more time with his family. He had a young son who was just over 2 years of age, and I think he said that his son needed him more than the people needed him in terms of his fans, so he chose to concentrate a little bit more on having a private life, and he still wrote 2 albums during that time and then returned back to playing live in 1976. So in 1976 he toured Australia, and at this time his record deal with Columbia, they were advancing him $1 million for every album that he recorded, because Neil was on a hot streak in the 70s, just writing hit after hit, and Columbia Records did not want to lose him. He also released in 1977 with Barbra Streisand, You Don't Bring Me Flowers, and that was a massive hit as well. Barbara had recorded that previously on her album, and it was on Songbird, and that was a massive hit. Unfortunately, in 1979, Neil collapsed on stage in San Francisco, and it was found that he had a tumor on his spine, and they operated on it for 12 hours, I think it was, and he did say that he was starting to lose feeling in his right leg for quite a long time, but he didn't mention it to anybody, just ignored it. So after that operation, he had to go through a long spell of rehab, and it was really serious because Neil thought that he was going to die, so he actually wrote farewell letters to all of his loved ones. In 1980, he starred in the film called The Jazz Singer, and I don't think it did really well at the box office, maybe didn't get the best reviews, but the soundtrack for the movie, which Neil of course did, spawned 3 top 10 singles, and also the song America was from that soundtrack, and what a huge track that was and still is. Fast forwarding to 1987, this is when UB40 released their reggae version of Red Red Wine, and that went straight to number 1, and it was another example of a song written by Neil Diamond that became more famous with another band, and it happened with the Monkees as well with I'm a Believer. These tracks that Neil wrote that other bands did covers on just went on to be massive hits. Throughout this time, and pretty much for the whole of Neil's career, he was out there playing live, touring, putting on such great shows. Obviously, we had great songs with Neil, but the arrangements that he put together for the live shows really did set him apart with that full band sound that you can't beat live. Also in the 90s, he released 6 more albums, and Sweet Caroline during the 90s became one of those songs that was featured at sporting events all the time, and it's just a sing-along song pretty much anywhere you go. I can speak for myself. At university, it would always come on at the end of the night in the university club that everyone went to. Fast forwarding to 2008, this is when Neil released Home Before Dark, and that topped the charts in New Zealand, in the UK, also in the USA. So a massive hit again. He's just got this Midas touch when it comes to writing great albums and great songs. He also performed at Glastonbury that same year. Obviously, in this video, it's going to be impossible for me to cover everything, but just to finish with, in 2011, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He also got his Hollywood Walk of Fame star in 2012. In 2015, this is when he did his Melody Road tour, and this was a multimedia spectacle because he got involved on Twitter and Periscope, and it opened him up to a whole new demographic of fans because he was really on the cutting edge of getting this tour in front of as many people as possible through social media. Bringing things right up to date, unfortunately, in 2018, Neil was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, so he retired immediately from live performance, but he said at the time that he was going to keep writing, keep recording, and work on new projects. And in 2018, 2019, Sweet Caroline was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Recording Registry, and that's for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So it's one of those songs that we'll never forget it anyway, but it's going to be around for all time. And Neil has written so many songs like that. Like I said at the beginning of this video, one of those songwriters that if there is a formula for a surefire hit, he was one of those that got really close to finding it. But we can see in this performance that he's got the musical ability, the instrumental ability, the appreciation of melody, just everything rolled into one, and then you can add his voice just as that cherry on top because it was so unique in itself. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!